friends, what's going on? Hopefully I'm live and I'm live in the right place. I was doing some tests last night because that keeps happening, so I wanted to figure out what was going on. They were inconclusive tests because, of course, whenever you show up to the doctor, you're never sick anymore, but that's how things go. But hey, what's going on? I see Salty Nick, Better with Bacon, Professor X. Wow, the Professor X is in my chat right now. And little Chris from Crit / the ICRPG server. What's up, folks? Hopefully everyone's doing alright today. This is kind of a weird one. I just thought I've been doing all this prep in Grimwood Games. What's up? In Swords and Stones. Good morning, kids. Is it still morning there? It's like 1 p.m. here. Thank you, Tim. This is a very nice shirt. It's for a little game you may have heard of called Tales from Elsewhere, Clock World. As I usually do at the beginning of my stream, I'm going to do some giveaways. I already have my giveaway thing ready to go this time. I learned from my mistakes. But start of the new year, I'm going to give away this book. Today, I'm giving away some dice. If you want to be involved in any giveaways in the future, be sure to sign up for my mailing list, which is in a link in the description below. But today, I'm going to give away these babies, and I'm going to do a quick switch cameras here. I'm going to show them off. These are like 5th edition death save dice. There are 5 of them. They're, pass or fail your death save, and then they have like, a crit fail and a crit success. So I'm going to give these away to someone by the end of the stream, and we'll figure out who. 10 a.m. Oof. This is early. Well, thanks for joining us so early. Appreciate it. Today, I want to do something a little different. I've been prepping my games, but I thought maybe it would be fun to talk about prep itself. Like, is this thing on the screen? Oh, well. To talk about the different styles of prep, or the different approaches to prep. Because I feel like a lot of us, we kind of like glom onto one style of prep, and we structure our entire process around it. So I just wanted to talk about what the different styles of prep are, and let me see if I can do a zoom in here. Okay, so this is not an end-all be-all list, and before we even get started, I know that there are a ton. Hey Jorb, the music is louder than you. Thank you, appreciate that. I'll turn it down. I know that there are a ton of videos out there where they, or articles and things like that, where they break down the different types. Maybe I'll turn my mic up a little too. Is that loud enough? Can you guys hear me? Little characters. Oh, thank you. I just blew one away with my breath. But this is kind of the ones I came up with. And I'm really like framing these around how you prep, if that makes sense. So I'll just do my quick run through of like the sort of, I'm going to say the word umbrellas or categories of prep, because I think there are many other more than this, many more. That was a terrible way to say that. Many more than these, but a lot of times I think they fall under these umbrellas. So let's go through them together. First, and I started to kind of start with like what I think is, in my opinion, some of the more time-consuming or effort-inducive, is that even a term? Kinds of prep, and I started to work my way down into the more minimalist styles, in my opinion. So we have scripted, and this is something I used to do when I first started playing 5e. I had a lot of examples in my life at the time, like Critical Role and a lot of live plays, and I thought that like most adventures, and I actually think a lot of 5e adventures are kind of written this way too, with a linear or a predictive style of prep, where like you as the game master, you try to figure out what your players are going to do ahead of time, and you typically make a lot of your prep around those predictive sort of anticipatory events that are gonna, like my players will probably do A or B, and one way I think of this is branches. Like if you've ever done one of those sort of like, I think they're called spider charts, where you have like a circle in the middle and it's like meet at the end, and then it branches off into two other circles and it says, like go fight the big bad, or like interact with this guy, or go over here, that sort of stuff. And I feel like these are pretty involved because, in my opinion, when you do this kind of scripted style prep, you end up using or writing down and preparing a lot of things that don't get used. So that is one more involved style of prep. Now, I just called this one study or studied because this is like your anything from like a pre-written module or adventure book to like, like something like an easy D6 book of adventures. This is a style that I think requires less creativity on the side of the game master usually, but is more, you spend a lot of time like downloading, and I was going to do some examples, so let me grab a book. Now, I don't actually own any 5e, oh, now I'm way zoomed in. I no longer own 5e like big adventure books, such as like Rime of the Frost Maiden or anything along those lines. But here, I'll zoom out so we can see this. But I still have this One Shot Wonders book of adventures, and I think this follows pretty close to the example I'm thinking of. This is your style of prep that, or which one am I on? I'm on study. Let me grab my thing. Yeah, this is a style of prep that like still assumes you're going to use a written adventure, something that's probably published or already made ahead of time, and you're going to go in and you're going to learn what you need to learn from it, and maybe make notes or make it your own, but you're still pretty much going to follow what's already been written. So the prep is less about you generating things or coming up with ideas, and more so digesting the ideas that are already there, figuring out how to make them work for you, or lots of your old school style dungeon crawls are like this. And in fact, oh man, my guys just blew everywhere. Sorry, little guys. I grabbed an adventure that I like, the Isle of the Plangent Mage, because this one sort of follows like a hex grid area, but it really is kind of a point crawl with a dungeon crawl in it. And this is still pre-written. You have your adventure overview kind of stuff. You have the rumors or the hooks that are going to get the party involved. You have the treasure that they might find, and then you can go room by room or area by area depending. And I like this kind because it's really digestible. The areas marked only have like a few bullet points. They have bolded text for the really important things. Got your like stat blocks and stuff. But the idea is that any of these studied prep styles, you are just taking something that's already there. You're not creating anything on your own. You might modify it, like I said, but this is a style that's really geared more towards someone who doesn't want to spend the limited time they do have to prep being creative. And sometimes I lean on this. In fact, we'll talk about this a bit later when we get to hybrid. But I tend to do a mix of a few things, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I just want to show off this. And I really like, speaking of which, this one has like little section breakdowns of the different areas, which is cool, but I digress. So, all right, so we have our scripted, we have studied or study, and then this is kind of a generalization, but I put the over prepper. This is a weird style of like TTRPG prep that I don't think I'm honestly altogether as familiar with. I maybe did stuff like this in the early days of running games, but the idea is that it's a detail-oriented style of prep. You base it on maybe, this is, if you've ever looked at your GM's book and they've got like 1,000 years of history written down. They have lore for all the gods. They have long descriptions for every faction with every character that's in the faction, what their rank is, what their motives are. This is just a detail-oriented style of prep that goes... I'm trying to be not judgmental about these styles of prep, but I'm going to say it probably goes too far in the sense that you're going to end up throwing out a lot of the stuff that you spend your time prepping. So that is a style of prep I see a lot, and I think whenever people get burned out or overwhelmed and they ask questions, yeah, the lore of Warhammer 40k is a great example. Like super, super cool lore, but like, man, if you're the kind of game master who spends all their waking free time scouring the wikis to figure out which faction would best oppose some other faction, and like you just get so deep in the paint every time that you prep, I think this style of prep just ultimately leads to burnout. You'll have like one really killer campaign every couple of years, and yeah, world builder syndrome is another good way to put it. I would, if you find yourself in this camp, I would urge you to like figure out some of these other prep methods and try to create a better hybrid form for yourself, because I think this is one of the leading causes of burnout. In fact, I'll just share a quick story about this. The first game I ever ran, I was feeling a lot of, I don't know, anxiety is not the right word, but like I didn't know enough about role-playing games, so I think I overcompensated by just scouring wikis, and I ran in the Forgotten Realms, so I had players at my table that were like huge Drist Duarden fans and stuff, and I remember getting in my head and thinking like, they're gonna know so much more about the world than me, so I started to go down this deep dive of like learning the history. I watched all the old Jorfdan history videos, which are great videos, but I think the problem was I had the wrong approach to prep, and it ended up with me getting really burnt out really fast. And ultimately, it led me to discover things like method processes like the lazy DM, which was a great change for me. But I probably spent a year doing that style of prep, and it was awful. Yeah, it was a lot of wasted time basically, and wasted energy and effort. So anyway, I'm going to move on now to location-based prep. And this has quickly grown to one of my favorite styles of prep because I think it's a balance of a lot of these things. I originally really started to discover location-based prep when I started looking at more old-school games, because there's such a presence of things like point crawls, hex crawls, sandboxes, things like that. I really started to, it started to click that like, even if it's a village, right, then you're going to go to the inn, they're going to get rumors and information from the inn, they're going to learn what their quests are, they're going to meet a few key characters or NPCs, and then from there, they're going to travel to other locations, which will have more seeded information that they can then make more choices, have more interactions, more scenarios will unfold, things like that. I really started to dig this location-based idea. It really makes a lot of sense to my brain. In fact, I should have brought my Mucklands book over here, because the Mucklands is a really great example of location-based adventures that are also seeded with really good NPCs and quests. And I think it's just a really solid example of how to like take and pick the pieces you like without overwhelming. It's kind of a mix of these two, right? It's location-based and studied. You don't have to spend a lot of time coming up with stuff because it's already done for you, and those locations are the only thing you have to prep. You don't have to worry about, what's at the end of the adventure book, because it really only depends where the characters currently are or where they're about to go. So that's a really good middle ground for game masters who do like a good bit of detail but don't want to be overwhelmed with sort of that world builder syndrome, over prepping kind of stuff. So that's one that's grown on me, like I'm saying. And in fact, I found a couple of examples that I really love of this sort of thing, like the cursed scrolls for Shadowdark. They have these really cool hex crawls, but the thing I like about them is all the important hexes are circled or highlighted, and then they have like your rumors for that area. And then if you flip way back here and we look at the actual Gloaming adventure in this book, and we have a hex key. And what I love about this, I have become someone who seeks out more minimalist styles of prep. So I can look at this and I can see Shattered Tower, a crumbling keep in a clearing choked with thorns and nettles. A heavy trapdoor in the ruins leads down to an old cistern, where a dark shape slithers beneath the putrid algae. See, that's an evocative scene. These are only like a paragraph or two. They don't overdo it with the details. And in fact, the dark shape slithering beneath the putrid algae, I can decide what that is in the moment. I can roll on a random table ahead of time when I'm prepping and kind of generate an idea for what's going to be there. This was something that really was a game changer for me. Finding the right level of words and detail that works for me as a game master was a huge relief in my prep, because then I'm able to take things like this. And in fact, you know, if you guys have been watching the streams, if you've been keeping up with my Let's Prep stuff, you'll know that I've been really focusing on a location-based prep style. And in fact, I'm kind of doing a mix of minimal, or I call it like bullet point prep, along with location-based. And I'll just show some of this. We might get into this if I have time today, but you know, we've generated a few of these together as part of streams, but this is like one whole island adventure. Basically, this should take like a session or two, maybe. And if you notice, I tried to keep everything to just a couple of bullet points per POI, point of interest. And this was stuff I just rolled on tables and generated because I wanted to come up with ideas that weren't just my own, which is another part of that minimalist style of prep where, like, you don't spend a whole lot of time just brainstorming. You just kind of roll, you see what's there, you get inspired by it, and you move on. And then we ended up doing that entire dungeon crawl for Shadowdark. This is Psalm of the Sleeper. I don't have the map on me. Actually, it might be in this. Let me see real quick. I'll show it off if there's a... Okay, this isn't the one I ended up recording all the details in, but this was the original map I drew up. This is my little grid notebook. But basically, yeah, just more location-based stuff, because a dungeon crawl is just a zoomed-in location-based adventure for that style of prep. But, you know, as I learned how to do this, I started to move away from kind of pre-written stuff a bit and started to generate my own. But let me show you an example while I'm on different prep methods here. So, okay, let me go back. I've got a few good ones in here. In fact, let's look at... This is one of my favorite Shadowdark adventures. It's a small adventure called the Wavestone Monolith. Now, this is actually already just a little flip sheet that has some information in it. But what I found was, for a dungeon crawl, it was almost too light on the details for my liking. So what I did was, I studied it. I did this method here. I took the module, but then I changed it a bit with my minimalist style. I wrote down the details that were important for me to run it, and it ended up looking something like this. Now, this isn't something everyone needs to do, because I basically rewrote that adventure in a bullet point style, which I don't necessarily recommend. But I am a auditory and I forget what it is, tactile learner. So like reading it and then writing it down again has solidified this adventure in my brain. I could pretty much write this thing run this thing from memory as long as I have this map here. And if I forget something, I've got the details I need here. I even did some color stuff just to be like, okay, red is where like traps and enemies are. Blue is like items or curios that the characters might be interested in, stuff like that. But anyways, I'm getting way off track here. I'm getting way deep in the paint. So let's go back and let's look at method-based prep. So method-based prep is, I consider this like the lazy DM, story structures, 7 steps. Basically, anytime you see something out there on the internet, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's in a book or like an article, anything that's going to have a number in it is pretty much going to be one of these. Or like, I think the lazy DM has a checklist. So checklist style things. And my example for this is going to be ICRPG, because there's a great checklist in here. And I use this sometimes when I'm doing like one-shots or trying to create an adventure from scratch. The story architecture. And I'm just going to go through, I'm going to read the steps, because I think just in seeing this example, if you're not already familiar with it, you'll be like, okay, I know what this is. So with this one, you imagine the layout of, well, for this, you imagine it in index cards, but you can write them down and move these steps around if you want with this structure, which is kind of unique to these things. But number 1 is the stakes or the setup. Kick things off with a bang. If we don't X, then Y will happen, and Y is very bad. Get there. You and the players find a way to get to the location. Horses, a starship. Be brief and set the scene with a vivid description. And I almost added one-shot prep, because it's kind of its own thing. But I think a lot of one-shot style games, or one-shot prep, falls into these method-based things, because, it's stuff like these story architectures or 5-room dungeons, again, anything with a number or a checklist in front of it, basically. But yeah, I'm getting distracted again. Meet the enemy. Here's your first fight or obstacle. Give it teeth. Number 4 and 5. Skill checks. To reach the heart of the matter, have them climb, dig, hack, or swim their way to the core of the problem. 6 and 7 are escalations. More resistance along the way reveals how dangerous this mission really is. This is the perfect time to have a really tough fight. Number 8 is your resolution. Reveal everything. Show the big bad guy or have it all crumble down. Tie up the loose ends and make an ending they'll remember. Number 9, return. Conclude with getting the rewards, being adored by the villagers, going back to the castle, or warping into another system. It's a really great, succinct model for how to write an adventure, and you can really take this and stretch it to an entire campaign, or you can, mold it to a shorter campaign arc of 4 or 5 adventures. I think it's a really, if you don't have index card RPG, I think this is one of the best game master's guides that is also succinct, because sometimes they can be really wordy and feel like you're prepping for the SATs or something, and I don't think that's always super helpful. But yeah, that's the gist of method-based prep. There are lots of them out there. There's probably, I'm gonna guess, hundreds at this point. You probably are familiar with the popular ones like the Lazy DM, but everyone who's had an article or is a blog writer or YouTuber probably has their own method-based prep that they've talked about at some point. Last, but certainly not least, is the minimal or zero prep style, or what I call a bullet point style, or a cheat sheet, or this idea of on the fly sort of off the cuff collaborative style prep, and these are really just truly vibes based prep. This is high level game master stuff. I think you don't start out here necessarily unless you're already some sort of a performer in some way. That's my guess, is if you are the kind of person who's already used to like improving, doing things on the fly, you just have enough creative juices flowing around your head that you don't have to spend a ton of time writing things down and prepping, then that's a very advanced style of prep, which I think is something I'm gonna make a generalization. I think this is something we should aim for, and that doesn't mean that you have to end up here or that it will work for you or your brain type. But I think it's a goal to move towards, because the further you can get from over prepping and the closer you can get to minimalist prep, I think the better for you and for your group or your players or your table. Because I think this is burnout, this over prepping, and I think this is freedom and fun and the ability to loosen up, have a good time at the table. And I think it's these sort of details that trap us into thinking that we have to run a game a certain way or we have to go exactly by the book. And I know that's a generalization, but I guess I'm just going to move on to the last one, which is hybrid, because I'm going to make another generalization. I think a vast majority of us are hybrids. In fact, I think most of us are hybrids. I don't think anyone adheres to any one style all the time. I think what we tend to do is we pick two styles that work for us, like scripted and method-based, or study and location-based, or over prepper and scripted. When you're first starting out, I think this is a lot of us. And so I won't say that there's like a best style or something. It's whatever works for you, because we're all different. We all need different things. And in fact, to even like walk back some things I've said in like podcasts and other things, I tend to idolize this minimal to zero prep. But I also know things that can work for me. Like, for instance, we were having I think it was Scrat I was talking to. And we were talking about minimalist prep. And one of the things he was talking about was he said, I'm terrible at NPC names, coming up with NPC names on the fly. Well, that's where I think you do need to be an over prepper. That's where you want to go in ahead of time and you want to write down a list of 100 possible NPC names with like a little motivation or something next to them, because that's maybe the kind of stuff you aren't good at doing on the fly. You're not good at doing minimalistically. So you need a method, or you need to over prep, or you need to study, and that is totally fine. And so I don't want to like sit on a high horse and be like, there's one way to be a good game master and you must prep like me. But I think it's just good to be aware of what your prep style is, or that there are other prep styles that once you try, they might end up making you more comfortable at the table, or, pulling some of the burden off of your shoulders that leads to burnout. So I just kind of want to talk about this today. And then I'm going to go over some of the stuff I've done specifically that works for me, because I think it's good to have examples of these things instead of just talking about them theoretically, if that makes sense. Because it's all fun and good to talk theoretically, but what this specific playlist is about is showing examples to people of things that I do or I have done in the past. So I've been talking for like 20 minutes straight, and I'm going to look at chat for a second. So I'm going to try to catch up, but this is it's been going on for a minute. So all right, I will build around what my players are interested in, then I expand based on their interest, which is another great way to do it. I would say that kind of falls into detail oriented. I maybe have a skewed opinion on this now because I play a lot of more lethal games at the moment, or like not even lethal, but like I keep wanting to use the word generative, emergent, I guess, emergent style games. And emergent style games tend to not focus on any one character for too long. And I don't think this is what you're saying, but I'm thinking of this from like potentially people watch this with like a 5e sort of lens, and they think like, oh, well, I just take the characters' backstories, and then we run with that, and I create a story around their backstory, which is great if you're playing a heroic game where your characters don't die. But I tend to have a lot of cast changes in my games, and I base a lot of that sort of vehicle of story on the company or the group or the faction, the guild, whatever it be. And I think that can work. You can still figure out what your players are interested in. Like I have one guy at my table, and every time I introduce a halfway interesting NPC, he just wants to get to know that character. He wants to bring him along with us. He wants to really dig into the lore and the history. So I do create bits of lore and history around like characters. In fact, I don't have it here, but I wrote out like a dialogue because they accidentally end up killing this pyromancer. So I wrote this whole dialogue around this NPC or diary rather, sorry. And I printed it out and I made it look all old school and stuff. And I'm going to hand it to him next time when they go back to the pyromancer's tower and they go through his stuff and they find his diary. So that is one way that like you're absolutely right. You can create pieces that the characters latch onto, or specifically if there's like factions or a quest, they're like, we have to get this sword, the great master sword or whatever, the sword of time. And you feel like your players are latching on to certain things, well, by all means, put that sword at the next location or put that faction there. Or, find a method like the Lazy DM has clues and secrets. Find a method that works for you where you can plant those clues and secrets, I think the way he does it is actually detaches it from a specific NPC, but keeps the clues in pocket that anyone could know and stuff like that. It's absolutely lean into what your players enjoy, but also don't burn yourself out with the way you prep, if that makes sense. You can marry the two ideas. I don't think they're separate things, is what I'm getting at. Okay, I'm rambling again. I think it's important to acknowledge that the genre and style of the proposed scenario has a huge impact on the GM preparation. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I kind of meandered several times and then talking about like old school games versus heroic or super heroic games rather. I do think your mileage will vary depending on the system you're running, depending on the genre of the game. Like if it's superheroes, your backstory better matter. The reason we love Batman is because he's had a brutal history and it's personal, and those criminals are personal to him, and the city is personal to him. He has a vested interest in the company that his parents left behind to him because, if you haven't had Batman spoiled to you at this point, I don't know what to say, but because his parents were murdered. So, absolutely. Definitely an Eldritch mystery investigation is not a dungeon crawl. Absolutely. And you can still take a lot of these methods and apply them to, Call of Cthulhu. Like, you can study that pre-written adventure. You can base it on the locations. You can put those clues or those enemies and things or surprises and twists within a location. You can still do a method-based Call of Cthulhu adventure or minimalist prep if you're good at that sort of thing. But absolutely, great points. I have the Lazy DM book. Great book, worth it. Yeah, it changed. It rewired my brain at the time. I was doing a lot of 5e, and I was doing that over-prepper style. And I realized by reading that book, there were so many things I was wasting my time and energy on. Like, I would just go so deep into detail after detail and never, ever end up using it, ever. So, Lazy DM was a lifesaver for me. Great book. Some kind of scenarios simply require more of a framework prepared prior. Otherwise, the GM and sometimes the players too just wind up paying for it on game night. I want more information on what you mean by that, Chris. Some kinds of scenarios simply require more framework. I think I do know what you're talking about, because I'm thinking of the game we played, like the sort of mystery that was like sort of I don't want to spoil it, but like Nosferatu inspired is the way I would put it, like classic sort of mystery. And yeah, you definitely have to think out how you're going to reveal the clues or the secrets and things like that. So it does depend. And this is more like in general than like in specific, because there's always going to be edge cases to anything, right? Like you're going to have adventures that you're going to want to spend more time on, whereas like a classic dungeon delve, you're like, well, there's some important things here, but I don't want to spend too much time on the dressings of every empty corridor and room, right? So you're not wrong, and that is a good thing to think about when you're kind of considering your approach to prep. All right, exactly. World build based on the player's current location, that's good. I want to run a game of Shadowdark. I love the way the adventures are organized. Yeah, I do too. It's, in fact, just to tout about Shadowdark for a minute longer, not even specifically the gloaming or the hex crawl, but like, actually here, in the back of the book, there is a dungeon crawl as well. It's a pretty sizable one. But if you look at the prep for that dungeon crawl, we have the hideous halls of Mugdalblub. There's an overview. There are the background of this location, the factions that are there, the rumors that lead up, or the hooks that lead to this adventure. We have some general stuff about Bittermold Keep. Order of battle, I can't remember off the top of my head what that is, but I think it's if like you start one fight and it pulls more or something like that. And then we have the areas, some random encounters, and then these areas, if you can see, are I hesitate to do this, but I always compare them against like 5th edition adventures, because if you look at a 5th edition venture, and I know it's a bad comparison, but like the entry hall would be like 3 pages, right, of this size text, or maybe even 4, depending. Whereas like this gives you a general feel of what's going on in the entry hall, and then like 4 bullet points of important things. I got to the point where, for me, this style of prep was so much easier because I could basically run this without really reading much ahead of time. My study time for this style, my study time was very, very low to almost 0, because I could get the general idea of what's going on in the place, skim read it even, and then almost run this as the players go through. I found that these sort of bullet point, and I pointed to Plangent Mage, or really any of these Necrotic Gnome adventures, they are just my style. They're just enough detail without going too far or being too thin. Because there are like a couple of Shadowdark adventures, those flip ones I was talking about, that I like basically rewrote, that were too thin for me. The flip ones, the 1-page adventures, were so sparse in their details, I felt like I had to create a few extra things, and that's why I ended up sort of rewriting them. But I'm getting carried away with this one. So, all right, good afternoon. Would it be rude for me to ask for a volume bump? I have my headphones at max, and I'm struggling to hear clearly. I can pull it closer, but I think I'm already maxed out on my volume. And I can turn down the music. Music's not really important. It's just a little ambiance. Actually, I might be able to bump it a bit. Let's see. Check. How's that? Is that a little better? Hopefully that's better. Sorry to realize that so late in the stream. But I ramble. I'm a rambler, if you haven't figured that out. That's a great looking map. That was a while ago, so I don't know which one it was. Bullet point pertaining to the possible encounter scenes. I have an outline for the overall adventure with hooks, with 4 to 5 specific possible encounters, scenes pertaining to the main theme. Yeah, if you're doing a minimalist style, I recommend 3 to 5 sort of details or bullet points, and never more, never less. 5 is like almost too many for me. In fact, most of the time when I was writing, let's see, when we've been doing these live streams where I do the island crawls, one of the things I try to limit myself to is about 3, maybe 4 bullet points per POI. So we just did Black Harbor last time. I wrote about the general feel of the island, and then these are the POIs on it. I didn't want to do more than 4 POIs, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then within those POIs, I think I do 3 bullet points each, if I remember right. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, and this one actually only has 1, but it was kind of like it's almost like a POI within a POI because it's inside of the lake. But yeah, this is and I think I should find my notes for this that we did from the stream, and maybe next week I will put the notes next to what I actually ended up keeping, because that was like sort of stream of consciousness, write down all the ideas as we sort of generated them together, and this is like what I will actually run off of whenever they reach this island. So I think that might be a helpful exercise. So yeah, but anyways, I'm losing the trail here. This is my version, my sort of own internal prep of like how to take an idea and distill it into what I need in order to run it at the table. So yeah, 3 to 5 bullet points feels really concise without being overly detailed. Actually, I'm going to save this page because I might come back to this. All right. I insert scenes from modules that I've downloaded, depending on where the party goes or decides to do with them, or with the theme information they have accumulated. Just to touch on this real quick, if I'm getting what you're laying down here, Swords and Stones, you're talking about like stealing stuff from other adventures, or like, you know, harvesting ideas from adventures. That's a good thing to do too. In fact, sometimes I like Rime of the Frost Maiden. I really desperately wanted to like. It's the only adventure I've ever just quit, like totally quit in the middle of, and not tried to like salvage it whatsoever. But that adventure had some cool ideas that I later mined and put in an adventure that I was just writing from scratch, and I was like, I really like this upside down crashed wizard city. Like, that is just the coolest idea, but they will never get to that because it's like the end of the book content. So I just took the ideas and I scraped them and lifted it and put it in a different adventure that I was running, and had way more fun with it. So yeah, definitely take all the adventures that you've bought, scrape them for ideas, and drive them like a stolen car, basically. That's what you do with Curse of Strahd. I like that. The problem with like going back into my chat this late is I don't know what you were referencing there. Part point to point, part sandbox, part single track railroad, allowing them to jump off the train wherever. Yeah, I made a video about this a long time ago, but I think railroad is the wrong terminology that we use, because, and this is just my interpretation of it with my weird brain, but like, if you're on a train, you can get off the train at any exit that you want to. That's not what I think people think about this term as, in like player agency or choice, or linearity, linear adventures. But I like the idea of an adventure that is on rails but has lots of stops, or you can pull that little line and force the train to stop and get out. Now, if your player pulls that line and you don't let them get out of the train and you don't let the train stop, that is railroading. That is taking away their agency. Whereas I love an adventure that's got a point, it's got a purpose. It is linear, but there are stops along the way that are interesting. And your players have choices like, do we stop here or do we keep moving, kind of thing. So, agreed. Interesting. I did a zero prep 30-minute session with a cousin last Thanksgiving. It was fun as hell. Awesome. I love zero prep. I love minimalist prep. I'm trying to write a game that is minimalist prep. If you don't know about it, 7 Delving Sins. There's my pitch. Honestly, I think you're giving zero prep gaming too much credit. You call it high level and evidence of superior GM skills, but it's not always so. I'm going to see if you elaborate on that later. I think it just depends on how well you can improv, honestly. I think it shows some skill in knowing how mechanics work in the game without looking it up. I think it's also responsible to acknowledge that ability to do a thing isn't a mandate to do it. Yeah, and that's kind of why I said, and hopefully I was clear on this, while I think it is good to get as close to this as you can, I don't think it's like a must do. And I really want to be clear about that. I don't think any of these are better than the others. They're just, if you can learn different ways, you're probably going to save yourself ultimately from burnout. Because if all you do is, just to flip the script a bit, if all you do is minimalist prep and you don't really build the muscle work to do the finer details like an over prepper, then you'll burn out in the other direction. Like you're saying, you might have a bunch of bad games that don't have enough details that your players aren't getting hooked on because you haven't done the time of learning how to make good details and improv those details. And so you end up burning out because no one wants to show up to your games, basically. You might burn out because you feel obligated by some weird, even if it's me, some internet pressure telling you that this is the only way. And I'm not an only wayist. I'm not a one-wayist by any means. Then, yeah, you're going to create burnout for yourself by your own high expectations of saying, like, I need to be insert your favorite GM here, a Brennan Lee Mulligan, a Matt Mercer, and just be this literal savant who is a paid actor and does all these voices off the top of their head. Don't put that pressure on yourself. If that is not your GM style, that's totally fine. I just think learning from the different styles, and yeah, I probably did. I do tend to emphasize minimalist prep more than others because I came from this, right? I was the over prepper. I spent way too much time focusing on the details, and I burned out hard. So my experience has caused me to look at this in a much more angelic glow. I definitely look at the minimalist style and I think, like, this is the way, or this is what we should all strive to be. But you're right. It's not has to be this. It's just, this is a good way to, it's a good way to test your skills, actually, is what it is. I think if you can do off the cuff more cheat sheet, and not even zero prep. I don't really like the term zero prep. That's why it's in parentheses here, because I think it's more bullet point prep, cheat sheet. I think lazy DM, Sly Flourish calls it like story beats. I think if you can learn the back and forth of story beats, that's a really valuable skill to have, because I think one of the things that kills more sort of D&D style games than anything is a lack of awareness of pacing or story beats, where all your combats are a slog. You never budge on what's written on the page. These are kind of things that will make your players walk away and say, man, that was a boring session. I don't know if I want to come back. So if you can at least learn some of these skills and apply them to other things and sort of hybrid your approaches here, I think that's why I hold it in such a high value. Again, don't hear me saying it's the only way, and probably do emphasize it too much, because that's the things that I've learned to do that I think work, but that doesn't, it's not going to be all things for all people, basically. So, good call on bringing that up. After quite a few decades of GMing, I'm an excellent improvisationalist, but that doesn't mean I should drop a no-prep Cthulhu mystery on my players. Yeah, I think we kind of went over this later. I prep enough that I feel comfortable that I can improv the rest. Yeah, that's exactly it, right? Like, you do these other things, and you over-prep the things that you're not good at improvising, basically. Hey all, hello, there's some highs and stuff. POI within a POI would be like a treasure chest, and then that chest are a few useful items, which would be another POI, right? I'm not sure if I understand the analogy there. POI within a POI. I mean, I've definitely done a dungeon within a dungeon, where like the players physically shrank down onto like a playing board, and then had a maze style dungeon on that playing board. But I don't think that's what you're talking about. But correct me if I'm wrong. I do think the sumptuous page layout and style of presentation in Gavin Norman's earlier OSE adventures, with inset mini maps, maybe that's what you're talking about, for each encounter area, is the modern state of the art of dungeon crawls. Yeah, and a lot of that is just preference and layout and design. Like, I personally just, this clicks so well to my brain. If I can pick this up, it's been a month since we played, and I remember, let's just do an example. And I remember they were in room 34, whatever that is. Then I can just look at it. I can do a quick scan. You remember all the things that are in there, maybe what's right around it's important to me, and I'll scan that while the players are like plotting or talking. I just love the layout and the design, I think, is what's so good about this. Even above like the creativity of what's written in this adventure, if I can run an adventure almost without prep, then you have done an amazing job as a creator, as a publisher. So that's a personal preference, but I can't speak highly enough of the necrotic gnome kind of stuff. It's really good. Yep, I borrow from other modules all the time, use them as scenes, my own campaign, so I'm not killing my brain. Yeah, and the well runs dry sometimes too. This is why I really started to embrace randomization, random tables, because you definitely hit walls creatively. I don't care how creative you are. I'm a songwriter. I'm trying to write a fantasy book. I'm writing a fantasy game. I couldn't have more creative bones in my body. But sometimes I just stick a lich at the end of an underground tomb, because it's familiar. So what's really fun about random tables and pulling ideas from other adventures is you can take them and plug them and mold them and come up with fresh new ideas that your players aren't like, okay, this is your 6th undead tomb with a lich, just as an example. But it's a great analogy of railroad. Trap your players in the train and they can't do anything. So here's how I prep. I need to get your take on it. 1, I copy and paste the chapter text from the book into a Google Doc. I read over the material without editing any of it. Once I fully read the chapter, then I move to the 3rd step. I edit or take out elements that doesn't make sense to me or add from the supplements. I think that's great. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what I'm talking about with, what I did with a lot of these. Oh, yeah. Hey, by the way, subscribe. Hit the bell. I literally put this in here so I had to remind myself to say that, because I never do it. I never advertise for myself. All right. Yeah, that's literally what I did with these. Like, this is the Hidden Temple, Raiders of the Hidden Temple from shadowdark. I did the same thing, except instead of copy and pasting, I just wrote it in my own words physically with pen and paper, because that clicks for my brain. But I think what you're talking about is actually a much faster way for most modern game masters to just copy, paste, edit. Then you don't have to do all this work. Yeah, that's great. I think that's perfect. Do what works for you, you know. I prep similar to Lazy DM prep book and put my prep on a 2-page spread and good to go. This has been a fantastic stream, Jordan. Very thoughtful. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by. Specific prep question. I have ran several one-shots with some shared PCs, but wanted to transfer to a world campaign. Some PCs have been in and out. Do you have any tips for transferring to a campaign? Oh, this is a great question. This could probably be its own whole video. Let me make sure I'm getting it right. Want to transfer to a world or campaign. Some PCs have been in and out. Yeah, so whether it's absences, new players coming on board, old players leaving, I love this subject because I think there are more ways to go about this than we talk about or realize. Because, you always hear the example of like, well, that player's just not there, or like that character's just not there, or someone else runs their character, that kind of stuff. But I think you're talking about specifically inserting new PCs into an already established adventure, if I'm understanding your question correctly. And it's honestly, it's not, there's no easy answer to this one, which is why I like it. I feel like we could chew on this one. I'm going to give you something I do. This is a tool I use. It is not an end-all, be-all tool. But I really like the idea of the company or the guild or the faction. So usually when I start off a campaign, I try to have a campaign primer, whatever you want to call it. And I usually say something along the lines of like, you guys all work for the same guild or the same company. What is your company? Or I give them a list of companies. And I say, pick one of these, like one's an assassin's guild. One is like, they seek out old magic artifacts, and, it's the Harpers basically from D&D and stuff like that. In that way, there's sort of a natural on-ramp whenever you get new characters that join, because you say, hey, they sent us a new recruit. Old dude died or left or whatever. He went off into the sunset to live a happy life. And so now we have a new PC, a new character or whatever. And so it's a natural way to insert them into what's already happening. The rest of the party might have a chronicler who fills them in on everything that's happened so far. And sometimes it's a smooth transition. Sometimes it's not, because I'll just be honest with you. I'll give you the exact example of this dungeon, right? I set up this dungeon with a fatal flaw. You start in the middle. And the way that you start in the middle is the half-troll tribe that lives on the island above throws you down in here to be sacrificed to their master that lives in this dungeon. I won't spoil it. But so that created a fatal flaw, because I'm playing like a West Marches sort of style island crawl, and so every time a new player shows up to the table, I literally have to have them dropped down into the middle of this dungeon, and it feels kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Gamist or something. That kind of pulls you out. But we always have a good laugh about it. I'm straightforward with them. I'm like, hey, look, this is how they entered the dungeon. This is how you're going to enter the dungeon. You get lowered down or thrown down. You land on this pile of other bodies. And when I first threw them into this dungeon, I said, there are other bodies in here, people that aren't dead yet, but they're basically incapacitated. And then I went, they're going to be your other characters when these characters die, because it's shadowdark. And then everyone kind of laughed, and they're like, okay, cool. And we went on from there. But everyone is part of the Lamplighters Guild. They're all, people who want to connect the old paths and push back the encroaching darkness in the world. They're these. It's a very standard sort of adventurers guild kind of thing, but it works, and people feel like they're already part of the group as soon as they join, because they see they're wearing a lamplighter sigil, or that they have a lamplighter tattoo, or they have a crest on their tabard or something. I let them come up with where their Lamplighter sigil is at, and then, you know, they integrate with the party that way. So hopefully that is one way to do it. That is not the only way, and in fact, like I said, could probably do a whole stream on that. I think that's a great subject to broach that not a lot of people have familiarity with, or like good ways to go about it. And in fact, I still learn new ideas, new ways to do it all the time, just because it's like, you know, you kind of have to lean into it a little bit, and especially like depending where your characters are already at within the story of that campaign, you know. But great question. All right, let's see. I'm going to do like one more. Thanks for the stream today, my friend. Always a wealth of info for this old man to absorb. Oh, well, write down as much as I can. Well, hey, you know what? These videos are on the internet forever. You can always come back to this playlist and you know, rewatch at 1 hour and 1 minute. So actually, we're almost over time. So let's do a giveaway in a second here. I clicked this expecting it to be a video. Didn't notice it was live. I'll have to watch the earlier parts. Yeah, come back and watch it again. In replying to transferring PCs to a campaign, yes, Curse of Strahd does something similar. Maybe the PCs are part of the Harpers that are seeing direwolf infestation in the area. That's the adventure hook, and the PCs hunt for the direwolves and stumble into the mists. Boom. Welcome to Barovia. The guild idea sounds great. I might have an NPC from it approach them then. Yeah, and I will say that it's best if you kind of like go into like a session 0 with that in mind, rather than like if you sort of spring it on everyone that it's like, hey, this guild wants you guys to all join. Usually like characters are very different at that point, and they have their own different sort of reasons for like adventuring and things like that, and it might be a harder sell to be like, everyone cool, unless you just say like, I would just be upfront and be like, hey, this was kind of a my bad thing, but like as new players introduced, we need a way to connect each other, so let's have you all be part of the same faction. Is that cool? And then, you know, like you guys decide what the faction is, and we'll sort of figure out a goal that aligns with the adventure goal. You know, just a suggestion there. I usually prep modular encounters, dungeon information that I can plug in multiple places into the campaign as needed. My group rarely gives me we're going here to do this ahead of time. Yeah, and that might be like a sort of a biased or a bent of mine, because I'm doing like a lot of open world, hex crawl, point crawl kind of stuff at the moment. So I tend to like ask once they finish a POI or a dungeon, I say like, hey, where do you guys want to go next? Because I have to prep the next area. Because I don't prep the whole map at one time, basically. Yeah, I'm still alive. Welcome here, DM Tales. I'm just talking my butt off about different prep things. So, all right, I'm gonna stop reading chat because it's been an hour and this will go on forever. But I am gonna do the giveaway live. This time I already punched in all the emails, so you don't have to wait 10 minutes while I do that. But I have to pull it up. And if you weren't here earlier, I'm giving away something every live stream that I do for a while. Mostly dice, sometimes role-playing game books. So make sure you join the mailing list, because that is where I'm pulling the names from, and that is how I email you to contact you that you've won. Otherwise, I don't know how to do it. Okay, click to spin, or press the center to enter. Okay, it's spinning. We're going to see who wins these death save dice. They're like 5e style death save dice. Okay, Ross Brubaker, 2010. You made this email, 15 years ago? Awesome. Ross Brubaker, if you're watching this, congratulations. I'm going to send you these dice along with like a shadowdark character sheet that I roll up, and I'm going to put a nice little note to you on there. So look out for that. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thank you guys for your question and your input. It helped to direct this into a conversation into an area I didn't really anticipate to go, but it was a good one. It was like, hey, don't lean totally on any one style, basically. Try the different styles, see what works for you. Be a hybrid. You know, combine these styles, pull from what you need, and that's mostly it. Last thing I'll do is I'll do my own sort of propaganda, if you will. Here, I'll make it big so you can see me. I have a game that I'm working on called Seven Delving Sins. I'm going to try to have it go to, I'm just going to say Kickstarter because that's the big one, right? That's the one we all know about. It's probably going to go to Kickstarter in January. And I want it to be, I want it to live. I think it's a cool game. It's the game I wish was out there, so hopefully it gets supported. If you'd like to support that game and get more updates on it, join my mailing list. Or if you just want cool swag, join my mailing list. Either way, you'll get emails from me, which is better than YouTube because YouTube is terrible at announcing things and getting information to the people who you want to give it to. So thank you guys for listening. Links are down in the description for that sort of stuff. And, congrats again to Ross Baker. I'll send you these. I'll email you, and hopefully you will respond. But yeah, thanks for listening. I'll do this again next Friday on a different topic, and it'll all be centered around prep, or I'll do more prep if I'm needing to get an island knocked out real quick. And like and subscribe. I don't know. I'm a terrible YouTuber. All right, thank you guys. I'm going to shut up now and leave because it's been like an hour. So, see you next time. Oh, last thing. Scrat from A Squirrel Plays. We're actually going to play Seven Delving Sins live. So if you want to see what the game is like in action, go over to his channel and subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when he goes live, because YouTube only tells you when people go live if you hit all and not personalized. A little PSA for you. Thank you guys for watching. That's actually it. We'll see you next time in the dungeon, no matter what choices you make. That's my Quantum Ogre Cast outro. I don't know.